الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله الأرضين عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف جعلنا محمد. In the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful. We are going to start a series of lectures on methodology of Islamic studies. As you know, this is a very important topic, especially for all who want to study any subject related to Islam. So, before going into details of different sciences, it's better to know an understanding of the methodology of Islamic studies, and then one can enter those sciences more insightfully and more deliberately. What we are going to do is that we will start with a definition of Islamic studies and some divisions of Islamic sciences or Islamic knowledge, and then inshallah we will try to develop a better understanding of Islamic studies. You all have some understanding of Islamic studies, but I hope that we will have a more profound understanding of Islamic studies. And then, having understood the main sources of Islamic studies and main sources of Islamic thought, main sources of understanding Islam, then inshallah we will try to discuss about each group of Islamic studies separately. For example, we will have some discussion about the Quranic studies. We will have some discussions about Hadith studies. We will have some discussions about Kalam or theology, about Islamic philosophy, about Islamic jurisprudence. And if we have time, we might be able to speak about the other knowledge and sciences that have developed in Islam, like ilm sarf and nahr, Arabic grammar, and also ilm al-balagha, the rhetoric, or about the collection of Arabic terms and words, but I thought it would be better that if we start with the most important ones and put these things at the end of the queue, so if there is time left, so we will deal with these things. So, trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we start our discussion about Islamic studies. First of all, we have to know this term. Of course, people might have their own definitions of Islamic studies, but let us have a clear idea about Islamic studies for ourselves. At least during this course, we will know what we mean by Islamic studies. We can say all studies related to Islam in a way or another. So we mean by Islamic studies all studies related to Islam in a way or another. This is a broad definition, but we need such a broad definition, because if we say Islamic studies means just Islamic sciences, So it doesn't include what other people have wrote about Islam, what, for example, Orientalists have wrote about Islam, or, for example, some studies about the Islamic communities. All these will be excluded. If we say Islamic studies means an academic study of Islam in the way that is present today in the academic atmosphere, so it will exclude some Islamic sciences because some of them are not dealt with in the academic world in the West. So we need a comprehensive and inclusive definition. So we say all studies related to Islam in a way or another. And inshallah I will then make it clearer what we mean by related to Islam. So at the beginning we should have this in our mind clear. We can say those studies that are related to Islam can be divided into two groups, two categories. So we say first, Islamic studies, we mean all the studies related to Islam, and it can be divided into studies of Islam itself, of course when we say studies of Islam itself, it includes Islamic subjects as well, because Islam is a cluster of different subjects. Because when we say Islam is a religion, what we mean by religion? We mean by religion a cluster of ideas that are founded on, for example, the basis of belief in God, belief in revelation, belief in resurrection, but anyway, it's some subjects. So, studies of Islam itself and studies of Islam in its historical development including the history of Islam, history of Islam is not part of Islam in itself, because this is something that has happened throughout the history of Islam, 14th centuries up to now, and it is not something that we can say is 100% Islamic in itself. In the history of Islam, you might have some elements that are against Islam. In the history of everything, you are not speaking about that subject in itself or in its nature. Including the history of Islam the history of Muslims and Muslim communities or states, if there were states, or caliphate and the like. It also includes the history of Islamic sciences. For example, inshallah we will have some discussions about the history of theology, history of Kalam, Ilm al-Kalam. We will have some discussions about the history of Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh. But these are not discussions about Islam itself. These are some discussions about something that have been there after Islam came into existence. Or, for example, discussions, studies about what has been written or what has been presented about Islam, either by Muslims themselves or by non-Muslims. So, for example, you might have your expertise in a study of an Orientalist figure, what he has wrote about Islam, what was his attitude toward Islam, what was the nature of the works that he did, and like this. This is also Islamic studies, but it is about what has been presented about Islam, including Muslim or by Muslim or non-Muslim, and many other things. These are not the issues that are related to Islam in itself. What we are more concerned is about this type of Islamic studies, studies of Islam itself. It means a group of sciences, a group of disciplines that try to discover Islamic views on different aspects. So we are more concerned with this type. So these groups of studies try to discover the Islamic view on different subjects. For example, we want to know what does Islam say, what Islam says about man, human being in the world. What Islam says about the relationship between this world and hereafter. What does Islam say about justice, about social justice, about freedom, about the role of a person in making his own destiny. All these subjects. What does Islam say about getting close to Allah? What does Islam say about rulership and the criteria that should be available in the ruler, the person who wants to rule the society. What does Islam say about politics? So these are studies of Islam itself. Suppose that we were living in the during the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if we wanted to ask him about Islam, he didn't answer to us something about the history of Islam or something that other people have written about Islam. What he was presenting was the pure Islam and we can say the Islam itself. So what we have to know is how can we understand, how can we discover the Islamic view, the Islamic point of view about different subjects. To be able to do this, we have to know that there are different types of subjects. For each we need different type of science, different type of study. So they are not all the same. So now we are going to have some divisions of Islamic studies in the narrower sense, which is the studies of Islam itself. Of course, this one is also very important, and it's also something that we should know, especially for those who want to be Islamic scholars in the first sense. They cannot neglect what has been done in this area. But anyway, now we are not more concerned about this, and inshallah in future, if we have time, we might have some more discussions about the second. There is a famous hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he divided the knowledge, into three categories. You might have heard this story that once the Prophet ﷺ entered the mosque in Medina, and lots of people had gathered around the person. There was a crowd of people. So the Prophet asked, what is the reason that people have made such a crowd? They said, this person is very knowledgeable. This person is very educated. If you ask him of any of your ancestors, of your grandfather or grandfather of your grandfather, he would tell you. He knows the genealogy of different families and tribes. This in Arabic is called Ilmul Ansab. Al-Ansab. Nasab means to relate. Literal means to relate, but here we mean that the relationship between families. So that person was very knowledgeable in this knowledge. So people were around him, surrounding him to ask him about their origins and like this. And then the Prophet ﷺ said that the knowledge is only one of three things. One is about beliefs or creeds. Or as the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, Ayatul Muhkam. which is interpreted by the scholars as a strong beliefs, knowing your principles of religion, knowing Tawheed, knowing prophethood, knowing the resurrection, all Islamic beliefs. This is one type. The second is morals. This is also very important, to know what to do, what not to do. And the Prophet said, Sunnatun qa'imah. Sunnah means the things that you are recommended to do. And the third, faridatun adilah. The duties, the obligations. So you can say the knowledge of laws or Sharia. So according to this division, this categorization, these three built up Islamic sciences. And then the Prophet said, whatever is beyond these three is a merit, but it's not a knowledge. He said they are fadl, means something that is a merit, something that is good, but it's not real knowledge. The real knowledge is something that deals with your perfection, with your faith, deals with your situation in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hereafter. So this is the real knowledge. Of course, we mean by knowledge here, knowledge in narrower sense. We mean Islamic knowledge. So from the very beginning of Islam, this type of attitude towards Islamic sciences have been very popular. To say that we have Islamic beliefs or aqaid, okay? Aqaid. We have Islamic moral values, which is akhlaq. And we have Islamic law or Sharia. You can say Sharia or fiqh. So these are the main branches of Islamic sciences, Islamic studies. But gradually, different types of sciences were developed. For example, it was not only Islamic theology or Islamic kalam that dealt with beliefs. It was also Islamic philosophy that dealt with beliefs. Of course, with different methodology and with different sometimes aims and objectives. Or we didn't have just ilm al-akhlaq that dealt with what we ought to do, what we ought not to do. We had also irfan, which was also of a practical nature, because irfan also tells us what to do in getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here for the practical laws, we didn't have just fiqh. Our scholars had to develop also another science which was called the principles of jurisprudence, usul al-fiqh, and also some other relevant sciences like ilm al-rijal, like ilm al-dirayah, which all help them to deal with practical laws. So gradually they developed lots of sciences to make them able to understand these three things. So we didn't have just three sciences. We had three types of subjects to know. But they needed to develop about 10 to 15 different disciplines, 10 to 15 sciences to be able to understand what are Islamic beliefs, what are Islamic values, morals, and what are practical norms. Okay? So now we have to get familiar with those different sciences that were developed by Muslims to be able to understand, to discover, to investigate these three areas. Okay. So I just start with a list of different sciences that were developed in Islam. But inshallah, some of them which are more important, we'll deal with them in near future, and some will be postponed for the end of the semester, if the time is enough for us. One of the first things that they had to develop was the Arabic grammar. They needed firstly ilm al-nahl. This dot under the H is to distinguish between this and this. So when we transliterate, for this we use this, and for this we use this. Okay, inshallah, gradually you should get familiar with this transliteration. Like, for example, sin and Sad. For sin we use S, for Sad we use S with dot. Or like Ta and Fa. For this we use T, for this we use to distinguish. So ilm al-nahl was one of the things that Muslims had to develop. And there is a historical story here that during the life of Imam Ali, there was a phenomenon that unfortunately some Muslims were not able to read the Quran correctly, according to grammatical point of view. Because you know, there is a difference between being Arab and knowing Arabic grammar as any other language. So sometimes you might not observe the rules of your mother, language, your native language. So Imam Ali alayhi salam taught principles of Arabic grammar to a person who was called Abul Aswad Du'ali. And then Muslims worked on it and made it a very complicated knowledge, ilm al-nahl. One of the recent books written on ilm al-nahl, which is a good book, is Al-Wafi, which comes in 4 volumes, it's thick, 4 volumes. So anyway, this is one science that they had to develop. They had also to develop al-Mustaf. This knowledge deals with the formation of the words, morphology. Unlike Nah, which deals with the occurrence of a word in the sentence, this knowledge speaks about the words themselves in isolation with the sentence. So it has nothing to do with the word being subject or object or like this. No. It is just saying, for example, that the word qabil is a derivative form of qabul. So if you want to make a word for some person who accepts, who makes qabul, so you have to say qabil. Or for example, alim is a person who has ilm. Jahil, a person who has jahl. So these types of things. How to make the past tense, present tense, future tense, and all these things. So they developed also this science. And this was very important for them, because without that, they couldn't understand the Quran and Hadith properly. They also had to develop ilm al-balagha. Al-balagha, the rhetoric. This is not something about the formation of the words or about the way that words have to be used in the sentence. No, it is about something more subtle and more important in some sense. It is about the way that you can present the same idea to be able to meet your needs. For example, in English, if you want to ask someone to sit on the chair, there are different ways to say that. Sometimes you say, would you please sit on the chair? Sometimes you say, please sit. Sometimes sit. So there are different ways. And all are correct according to English grammar, but it depends on the politeness or other things that you want to observe. Okay? So in Arabic, this is very important, especially for those who want to work on tafsir, for those who want to work on ahadith, to know this. There is a beautiful example which is usually mentioned in this type of knowledge. For example, just very basic one. You know, sometimes we say in Arabic, Zaydun qa'im. Okay? Means Zayd, a person, like Ali or Hassan, is standing. Zaydun qa'im. Sometimes we say La Zaydun qa'im. It means surely Zayd is standing. So sometimes we say Zayd is standing, sometimes surely Zayd is standing. And sometimes we say Inna Zaydan qa'imun. Or if you want to have more emphasis, you say Inna Zaydan la qa'imun. So what is the difference? When we say Zayd is standing, and when we say surely he is standing, and surely certainly he is standing. One of the masters of the rhetoric said, if you are speaking to someone who is just beginning to get familiar with the subject. He has not heard about the subject. He has no idea about the subject. So just simply you say, Zaydun Qa'im. If you are speaking to someone who has doubt about this matter, you say, La Zaydun Qa'im. What is the difference between the second person and the first person? The first person has no idea in his mind, just something new to him. So you say, Zayd is standing. Okay? But if he has already thought about this without making any conclusion, just has doubt, we say, La Zaydun Qa'im. Okay? And if he denies that Zayd is standing, so we have to say, Inna Zaydan laqa'im. You see? So, for those who are not familiar with this, it might seem that it is just some artistic way of putting words together. Something to make it more beautiful, or just, not making the words always the same and boring. But, in reality, no, there are very deep meanings beyond this. So this is Ilmul Balagha. This is very important. And there are many discussions here about this. If I want to give you another example, just to make you think about the importance of this. For example, we sometimes see that a person says, I saw a brave man. Okay? So it's not very complicated. I saw a brave man. But sometimes person says, I saw a lion. In the market or in the class. And here he means by lion a brave man. Doesn't mean the real lion. And he needs to show that he means by lion a brave man. So he says, for example, in the market or in the class, or some other things to show, some other evidence to show that he means a figurative meaning. So these are different things that are discussed in Ilmul Balagha, about isti'arah and about majaz and these things. The other knowledge that they had to develop was Ilmul Lugha. You know that in Arabic we have roots and then derivative forms of the same root. Okay? For example, we have ilm and then we have alim, ma'lum, alim, ulama, a'lam, allama. All these are from the same roots. Okay? Now we want to discuss the roots, not the formation of derivative forms from the roots which is discussed by Islam. No, the roots themselves. What does ilm in itself mean in Arabic? Okay? And this is very important knowledge. Because if we know exactly what does the root mean, so we can be able to interpret the Quran and Ahadith. For example, you see in the Quran, we have sometimes ilm For example, the Quran says, these people do not know. لا يعلم. Sometimes it لا يشعرون. What is the difference between ilm and shu'ur? In English, they might just translate it as knowing. But there is a difference between ilm and shu'ur. Shu'ur is something which is more gentle. To know something which is more gentle, you know. And it has a relationship with sha'r, which is hair. It means that it is so smooth, so gentle, so complicated that it will not be understood by everybody. So these things have to be discussed, and there is ilmul lugha. And many works have been written by Muslims on this. And inshallah, if we have time, we will see that one of the most important and earliest one was Kitabul Ayn. Kitabul Ayn, who was written by a Shia scholar. And all these things, if we have time, inshallah, we will see that the first people who developed these sciences were followers of Ahlul Bayt. Anyway, these types of knowledge, along with some other which is not that much important about Ilmul Aruz, Ilmul Qafiyah, which deals with the poems and like this, were developed by Muslims to be able to understand the Quran properly, to be able to understand the Ahadith properly. Okay? So these are not in themselves some Islamic subjects. Even if there were no Islam, no Quran, Arab still had some need for these sciences. But before Islam, there was no such a thing. After Islam, Muslims, because they were very interested in knowing every small point of the Quran, every small subject, and they wanted to make sure that they have understood it properly, so they worked on these sciences. But it's not something that we can say it's purely Islamic. You might have some Christians who are master in Al-Munah today. You have Christian Arabs. You have people who study these knowledge and they are not Muslims. So, just I want to say that these are Islamic studies, Islamic sciences, in the way that they were produced, they were brought into existence by Muslims to understand Islam, but they are not really Islamic. So we can say these are some instruments that serve as some preparation, some you can say means to help the real Islamic studies. So in Islamic seminaries, these are called muqaddamat. Which means foundation or basic things, elementary sciences, which are like just some preparatory sciences. You can translate it preparatory sciences. Okay? So if I ask you, are these sciences Islamic or not, what will you say? You can say yes and no. They are Islamic in the sense that they were, they help understanding Islam and they were created by Muslims. But they are not Islamic in the sense that they are not directly addressing Islamic issues. So in themselves they are neutral. Okay? So we leave these sciences for the, inshallah, end of the semester. There are times. that we need to get familiar, which is very important for us, is tafsir. When I write like this, it means A. And when I write like this, it means E. Okay? So in the past, they used to write tafsir like this, to show that it is E. But with this transliteration, now we can write it like this, tafsir. Okay? So, ilm al-tafsir. How to understand the Quran, how to interpret the Quran. And there are some related sciences like ilm al-qira'ah. About how to recite the Quran. This is also Islamic science, and it is related to the Quranic studies, but it's mainly focusing on the recitation. And also we have ilm al-tajweed. Ilm al-qira'ah can be considered as separate from tajweed, because tajweed is how to pronounce the words to have the most accurate pronunciation. But ilm al-qira'ah is mainly concerned with different qira'at, different recitations of the Quran that we have. You know that there are 7 famous recitations of the Quran. It means that the Quran might be recited in 7 different ways. For example, Malik Yawmuddin or Malik Yawmuddin. Okay? So, of course there are more, but these are the most famous ones, 7. But the most popular one is the way that Hafs narrated from Asim. He was a famous reciter of the Quran, Hafs. This is the way that we have in the ordinary copies of the Quran. It's according to the way that Hafs narrated from Asim. Okay? And it is interesting to know that Asim narrated from Imam Ali. So all Muslims now use the copies of the Quran that finally goes back to Imam Ali in the way that he recited the Quran. Of course they don't make very big differences, but sometimes they make some minor differences. To say Malik or Malik, it makes some minor differences. So Hafs narrated from Asim was from Kufa, and Asim from Imam Ali. Anyway, these are things that are discussed in ilm al-qira'ah and ilm al-hadith, which are related to Quranic studies, like ilm al-tafsir. The other important types of studies, so we can say these Quranic studies, including tafsir, is ilm al-hadith. Al-hadith. And we mean by hadith, narrations from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or other people whom we believe that are given the authority. For example, we say that the household of the Prophet also have the authority. Or some Muslims say that all companions of the Prophet have authority. Inshallah, we will discuss about these matters in future. So, it means the science that deals with the narrations. But it has different related sciences. You have Ilm al-Rijal here as well. Which deals with the chains of narrators. If, for example, Khomeini narrates something from his father, and then he from his master, and then he from his master, and then he from Imam, for example, Askari alayhi salam. So these people who are in between have to be evaluated, whether they are reliable or not, whether they are trustworthy or not. And this is what Ilm al-Rijal studies. And inshallah, in future, I will explain to you more about Ilm al-Rijal and main sources in Ilm al-Rijal, which are 4 important sources, which are earlier sources written and are very important. And we have Ilm al-Diraya, which can be considered as Ilm al-Hadith. There are different types of hadith. Some hadith is Sahih, some hadith is Hasan, some hadith is Mubassar, some is Za'if. There are different, because if the content of hadith is okay and it has been narrated by a reliable person, so who has been also a believer, a mu'min, this is Sahih. If it was narrated by a reliable person who was not mu'min, this is Hasan. If we don't know, for example, the narrator, but we still have some evidence which shows that this hadith is correct, so this is Mubassar. Many definitions and divisions are there. So it's not easy to become Muslim scholar. And also, for example, we have sometimes hadith that we don't know the person who has said this hadith. For example, we have some hadith that the narrator says that I heard this from Ma'soom, from the infallible, but he doesn't mention the name. We don't know, for example, is Imam Baqir or Imam Sadiq. This is called Marfu'an, because he doesn't mention some of the chains of the narration, or sometimes doesn't mention the final verse. Anyway, these are also knowledge that we need, different sciences that we need to understand ahadith. Okay? And inshallah, I will speak in future about tafsir, about inshallah ilm al-hadith, and possibly about ilm al-rajul. Inshallah, we will have independent discussions about this. And then they have ilm al-kalam. Kalam, with theology. This science, this kalam, tries to prove Islamic ideas and to defend them against the attacks made by those who are not following Islam. Okay? So if someone asks you, why do you believe in one God? Why do you believe in Quran? Why do you believe in Muhammad? Why do you believe hereafter? So you have to be equipped with this. So Muslims have to develop this science to be able to argue for the truth of Islamic ideas, and also to give response to attacks. Okay? So this is Ilm al-Kalam. In Ilm al-Kalam, they had a mixed methodology. They used both the rational arguments and also the, we can say, transmitted arguments. So here you have to get familiar with a very important terminology. Aqli, naqli. Intellectual and transmitted. I think it's with double T, yeah? Transmitted. I might make a mistake. For example, they say dalil aqli or dalil naqli. It means intellectual reasoning or reason and transmitted reason. Or they say ulum aqli, ulum naqli, means intellectual knowledge or sciences and transmitted knowledge or sciences. Different types of usage for these two terms, and these are very important. Aqli, naqli. Okay? Aql means intellect, naql means transmission. What do we mean by aqli and naqli? We mean by aqli something which can be understood by the intellect itself. Even if you do not believe in the Quran, you can understand it and you can appreciate it. Okay? So you are not required to be a Muslim to understand intellectual things. And we mean by naqli something that has reached you through religious channels. It has been transmitted to you by religious authorities. For example, it is something that it is mentioned in the Quran, something which is mentioned in ahadith. If you do not believe in those sources, you will not accept them. Okay? So if I ask you, why do you believe in heaven? And you say, because it is mentioned in the Quran. So it is, and it's not an intellectual response. It is a transmitted response. It means some type of response which is based on your own religion. Something that you have understood from your own sources. Okay? But if you say that I believe in heaven and hell because God is just, and to be just there should be some type of judgment, and those who have done good deeds have to be rewarded, and like this. And then I ask you why you believe that God is just. You say because, for example, God who has the final perfection cannot be unjust, and like this. So all are intellectual and rational things. So do you distinguish between these two things, aqli and naqli? Okay? Now, in Ilm Kalam, they have a mixture of intellectual and transmitted argumentation. So sometimes they use something according to Islam. For example, if you ask them about imamat, they might argue for imamat from the Quran, from sayings of the Prophet. Why? Because they assume that you already have understood the truth of the Quran. And sometimes they just might use some intellectual or rational arguments. And this is one of the differences between Kalam and Islamic philosophy. In Islamic philosophy, you don't argue from the Quran or from the Hadith. You have to use just your own arguments. Of course, you might mention the Quran. You might, for example, say that what I have argued in philosophy is approved by the Quran. But you cannot say because the Quran says that there is, for example, a God, so God exists. No. Or for example, because in the Quran said that there is a substantial movement, so we believe in substantial movement. No, you have to argue for that yourself. So this is one of the differences between Ilm al-Kalam and Ilm al-Falsafa. Philosophy, Islamic philosophy. And inshallah we will speak about Ilm al-Kalam and Islamic philosophy. And inshallah you will see what are the major schools among Muslim theologians and among Muslim philosophers. For example, we have Ash'arites, we have Mu'tazilites, we have Shia theologians here. So we should know what are the differences between them. And here we have those who have followed Shaykh Ashraf, those who followed Avicenna, those who followed Mullah Sadra. So inshallah we will get familiar with this and we'll see the difference between their methodologies. And very shortly, inshallah I will finish very soon, I mentioned the remainder. We have Ilm al-Akhlaq and we have Ilm al-Irfan, or you can say Irfan itself. Which means mysticism, or sometimes they say Gnosticism. And Akhlaq means, you can say ethics, but you should know that ethics has different meanings. You know, this stands for aim, and this stands for hamd. So Irfan is like this. You shouldn't say like this. Some people make mistakes. So Irfan. Okay? And both of them is divided into theoretical and practical. We have akhlaq nazari and amali. Theoretical akhlaq, practical akhlaq. We have irfan nazari, irfan amali. Akhlaq mainly studies what we have to do, what we have to practice to improve and promote moral values in ourselves and in the society. Irfan is more focused on our relationship with God, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How we can get ourselves so close to Him that then we can be no longer there. We are as if just something which no longer exists, and we will see that there is only one real thing, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all other things are so dependent on Him that they really do not present any independent existence. Inshallah we will see, and inshallah we will discuss about this too. And then we have al-fiqh and usul al-fiqh. We have Islamic jurisprudence, which deals with Sharia, with practical laws, how to understand the practical laws related to praying, fasting, paying zakat, performing hajj, all these things. And principles of jurisprudence, fiqh or al-fiqh, and usul al-fiqh. Principles of jurisprudence, which studies the principles that you need in jurisprudence to be able to discover Islamic point of view. It is like logic for philosophy. So here I also write logic, which is also something that is not Islamic in the sense that it's pure Islamic, but it's also something that you need to be able to have correct reasoning, correct argumentation. Inshallah we will discuss about fiqh and usul al-fiqh, but this I am not sure whether we will have time to discuss about mantiq or not. So let me just finish by saying that inshallah we are going to have a discussion about Islamic studies in its narrower sense, and that is a type of study that deals with the Islamic points of view regarding different subjects. So we are not discussing about the literature written about Islam or about the history of Islam or those things. No, we want to know how can we understand the Quran, how can we have our original understanding of the Quran and other Islamic sources. And I said that throughout the history of Islam, Muslims developed different sciences. Some of them acted as instruments to help them to understand Islam. So they were not simply and purely Islamic, but because it was developed by Muslims and they developed it for the sake of understanding Islam, so these are sometimes called Islamic sciences. But those are not as important as the other sciences. So Ilm-Sarf, Ilm-Nah, Ilm-Balagha, these things are important, or Ilm-Lagha, but we are not going to start with them. There are other sciences which are more important to us, and that is about the Quran itself, Quranic studies including tafsir, that is about hadith, and then about Islamic kalam, theology, philosophy, ethics, mysticism, jurisprudence, principles of jurisprudence. So inshallah we will try to understand the methodology of these Islamic sciences and the major works that have been written by Muslims on different sciences. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله.